Hey folks, before we get to the episode, I want to invite you to this month's International Directors Meetup, our monthly gathering of directors and theater makers from around the world. It's a space to share experiences, trade advice, and find support in what can often be a pretty isolating role. You can come and go as you need, drop in late, leave early, whatever fits your schedule. It's simply a chance to set aside time each month to sit alongside others who understand the work. For dates, times, and details, head to boardofdirectors.world and pull up a chair at the table. Join the board. When I sat down with Matt Torney, I expected to talk about directing, artistic leadership, and the long road from Belfast to New York to Atlanta. And we do talk about all of that. But what stayed with me most was something quieter and rarer. His insistence that kindness is not a soft value, but a rigorous one. Matt is the artistic director of Theatrical Outfit, one of the most vital theaters in my hometown of Atlanta. And in this conversation, he speaks openly about how values shape rooms, institutions, and ultimately the work itself. We talk about nostalgia for training, about impulse and discipline, about family and how art fits alongside a full human life. We talk about place, what it means to make theater in Atlanta right now, and how cultural identity and community aren't side conversations, they're the work. What I appreciated most is how clearly Matt articulates leadership as an ethical practice, kindness as resistance, integrity as an artistic tool, creating spaces where dignity, trust, and vulnerability aren't aspirational language, but daily actions. This is a conversation about directing, yes, but it's also about how we choose to be with one another while we make things, and how those choices ripple outward into our communities. This is my conversation with Matt Torney. So, Matt, we went to school together.
Yeah.
But we didn't really know each other then. You were a year above me, and as I knew, going into those second and third years, just trying to have any kind of friendships or life outside of that work is very, very difficult. So we didn't know each other. But when you look back at that time and that version of yourself, what do you recognize now and what feels completely foreign to that time?
Well, so I am deeply nostalgic for
Same.
that time.
Same.
You know, like to completely immerse yourself in ideas of directing, reading, living, staying up to 4 a.m. in the library, just exploring things.
Uh-huh.
It's a uniquely creative space where there's just everything is emerging quicker than you could process. And what I particularly value about that program is you were forced to put it into action. And that idea of constantly being active, constantly being in artistic motion, you could probably like add up all of the artistic development up to that point and since, and consider those 3 years like a compression of those things. But yeah, the extraordinary gift of getting to go really deep into something. And really like the lessons I learned there about staging, about reading, about theater still carry me today. You know, I still think about lectures from Anne Bogart and Brian Kulick and where is the event?
Yep.
You know, what are the deeper meaning of things?
Yeah. And you take that into, I mean, I always struggle with obviously having those voices, those very powerful voices in the head, squaring that with my style and my aesthetic as well. But what served you there? Like what did you like come in going, oh, this was a lack. There was a missing part of this. And then what was a thing of like, boy, I wish we had something else because I still have that, or I left there with that problem that I'm still possibly dealing with.
Well, I had like a bit of a bipolar experience between the two teachers that I think lines up with exactly what you're talking about. So when I came into the program, the strongest thing I had, like as an artist, was just pure impulse. Just impulse, energy. I think that there's this generation that people talk about as exennials, which is grew up analog, internet arrived in your teens. And I think about it all the time as a director because having to process a physical analog world and having ideas of memory and play and culture living in relationship between things and bodies, and then suddenly it all going digital. I just think that collision is very interesting artistically, because at your fingertips you've got, I have the memory of my grandmother's house full of relics from the 1930s and 40s, and also remember those first AOL chat rooms. So I think, when I came into the program, I was charged with like ideas and things I'd read, and was just ready to create. I was also very naive. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I didn't understand what the Ivy League was. I didn't understand, what the rigors of it would be. So it was like, so yeah, all of those things I'm describing are like energy and impulse, and that meant I was very good at the side of the learning that was about create something new, have an impulse, have some kind of wild, inspired idea about how to turn this painting and this poem and this text into something new. And what I really encountered, like what I really was shaped by, were ideas about rigor and ideas about discipline. Because if I wasn't really interested in something, if it wasn't really igniting that passion, kind of found it hard to show up fully for it. So
Yeah.
I'd phone it in a little bit.
Yeah.
And I remember like Brian Kulik is just an incredible teacher, and the methodology, the clarity with which he stacks it all together really formed how I think about theatre, but also created some tension because I write these essays and I was used to blasting out essays and getting A's and everyone loved them. And he'd be like, no, not good
Yep.
enough. Not good enough. And I'm like, oh, it's fine. Come on. I wrote this essay. And no, not good enough. Not good enough. Think clearer, articulate more clearly, be more precise. And I think that was the quantum leap in my work. Was less I walked out of there a fully formed artist, and more whatever impulses and ideas I had or was driven by or was ignited by, I learned to stop, to think, to read more deeply and approach things with great intention. And that really is the thing that just basically describes my entire approach to directing. Is it's not just the idea, it's the execution of the idea. It's like, what was the new Brene Brown book, Strong Ground? She said leadership is both like inspiration and plumbing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that idea of plumbing, of making it work, of making real tangible decisions with real people in real time. I think that describes artistic directing as well as directing, because we need the wild inspiration, but if it doesn't communicate, if it doesn't exist in 3 dimensions, if it doesn't have a beginning, a middle, an end in a way that an audience can experience powerfully, you're sketching something from your own consciousness rather than creating something that exists between a lot of people and a lot of ideas and can resonate, which I think that's what we're all looking for as artists, is less to write essays about truth and create the experience of truth in the theater.
Had you been to the US before then, or did you come strictly for grad school?
I'd been to New York once to kind of see some Broadway shows and take that theater pilgrimage that all theater kids take. And then in my 3rd year of college, me and 3 friends borrowed one of my friends, who was from Virginia. We borrowed his dad's Volvo station wagon and drove through 30 states over 6 weeks. Yeah. It was like thousands of miles and 30 states. And we went to 30 states. We went to national parks and cities and
beautiful,
partied in New Orleans. And I think that's what kind of made me fall in love with America and understand just the vastness of scale, both geographically, intellectually, culturally, that was available here. So I remember I was convinced that I was going to be creating in the context of Irish theatre, because it's a very powerful theatre culture, and I came up in it, and that's where I did my early studies. So I thought, what a chance to go to America and learn some new things and take a break from that. 20 years later, I'm still here.
Was the idea that you were going to come in for a little while and then go back, or did you always have an idea of like, no, I'll stay here for visa issues, whatever, but like...
Yeah, I always thought I'd go back. Like the dreams of my future we're all in the context of, oh, will I get to work at the Abbey Theatre? Will I get to work at the Gate Theatre? Will I? Will I? Will I? And what I realized looking back is that there is no opportunity. At the time, there was no opportunities for advanced training in directing. And nearly every director had come up, based on their own vibes and imagination. And if any kind of solid craft-based learning came from elsewhere, from people spending time in London or people just being built that way. And many of my peers were moving to London. And that was something I considered. I remember I got onto this thing called the National Theatre Young Directors course, where they take like 25 young directors and you immerse yourself fully in the work that's going on at the National. And I got to work with a lot of kind of big name directors at the time and learn from them. But London is never somewhere I felt comfortable because, being from Northern Ireland, it's a little bit complicated.
Exactly, yeah.
And also there's a weird culture of making fun of paddies over there, which I never liked,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of Irish people either shrugged it off or didn't mind, but I was always like, "What?
Yeah. Constant reminder of it.
I don't like this."
Yeah.
And that's not something I experienced in America. And when I arrived in New York, I remember Columbia's on 116th Street, so you take the one train up and down to it, and the one train also goes to the Staten Island ferry, and everyone gets on and off the one train. You've got businessmen going down to Wall Street. Like, I remember Hasidic rabbis praying, people from the queer community, drag queens, menial workers who work in restaurants, construction workers, basically from all over the world. And then the local community of Harlem and students. And I just remember the culture I grew up in, you really had to be careful of what you said because everybody wanted to know who you were, where you lived. They wanted to place you. And I remember the great freedom of no one giving a shit. Yeah, I was just another person on the train. Now, looking back through the 2026 lens, painfully naive, but I'm not sure there's anything wrong with being painfully naive.
Not at
particularly
all,
in a falling world, it's nice to what innocence we have, we should hold on to.
Whenever I'm in another country, and I was in Asia for 10 years, all over Southeast Asia, and then Mexico, and then Middle East and Egypt, whether I wanted to or not, or whether I meant to or not, the Americanness was like a defining feature from an external lens, but also a sense of like, I'm watching, the news, and I'm watching the unfolding things that are happening over the country over the last 15 years. And I'm thinking of the Churchill quote of saying, when I'm overseas, I won't speak ill of the country, but when I get back home, I'll redouble my efforts of what I missed out on. Do you feel more Irish here than you did back home? Are you reminded of that? Or is it kind of, you've been here long enough now that it's a bit of a mixing and melting? Hard to say.
For the first, I don't know, decade that I was here, I was very conscious of being Irish, being European, having like a different set of, or being formed by a different set of values and a different set of questions. And I suppose I always had, in some way, the expectation that I was going to go home. But it wasn't so immediate as to go home for my career. It was more to go home to be near family. And then I remember going back to Dublin after I lived in America for 10 years. And a lot of the places that I used to hang out were gone. The pubs are closed. The coffee shops were closed. The theatre companies I used to work for, most of them were gone. There was only one left. That's from the independent theatre companies. And then you realize that where you live and how you live is a very complicated relationship with time. So there was a few opportunities that came up for me to kind of move back and move my family back. And it really made me realize that the Ireland that I'd been dreaming of was gone. Not that it had been taken from me, but just whenever you step away, the culture doesn't stop changing, particularly as the rate of change of culture is accelerating.
Yeah.
And then being from Northern Ireland in particular, and our unique history of kind of violence and self-determination, there was just something like you step back into that world and atrocities are happening and everyone's like, oh, well, one more. And you're, what? This is insane. What is, why are we not rioting in the streets? And you just lose that lens of like, normality of the whole thing. You see it as an outsider. And then, I think where I've ultimately fallen is between things, like a traveler, a wanderer, where I hold multiple perspectives. But I don't think that is a tragedy, because you just learn to locate in different ways.
Yeah.
And whenever I became a parent, nothing locates you more powerfully where you are than small beings.
No, and thank you for bringing that up, because I would like to talk about that, because it is something that we very rarely talk about, is family and an artistic career and family. And I had Perron on the podcast, and we spoke about what being a mother and leadership position and what it means to be negotiating in your contract for when you're freelancing, of saying like, no, childcare has to be a part of it and it can't come out of my pay already. So I'm getting less to do the thing that I'm already doing. And now we have a father, so it's good to kind of speak about that as you speak about family. Can you talk about the desire for that, what that means of what wanting family and the sacrifices, like where those negotiations happen? Because it seems from the outside, like theater is like helium in a balloon. It will take up all space if you let it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make that space? How do you make room?
So I am firmly of the philosophy that we are human beings first and artists second. And if you want to create powerful, relevant art, I think you've got to be alive in the world, having a deep relationship with a spouse that I adore and having kids. Like that, I don't really consider that to be a burden. I consider that to be a priority. What it really means in terms of work is that it's difficult for me to freelance fully or to go away. I would not be able to sustain the freelance career that a lot of my peers sustain, of directing 4-5 things a year in different cities. I just don't want to miss out on the big moments of my family life. And I think that idea of being located in a place and located in a family has great artistic meaning. And this is something that I bring into, you mentioned leadership as well. This is sort of a core philosophy that I carry into running a theater. There is a lot of discussion about the American theater. What is the American theater? The American theater doesn't fit. The concepts of American theater that originate in New York City don't fit the country. And particularly working in Atlanta, if we're trying to be part of the American theater, what does that mean? So the philosophy that I arrived at in my first year as an artistic director was that theater needs to be deeply connected to place and needs to be deeply connected to people.
Uh-huh.
So artists from that place, or who know that place, audiences from that place, or who knows that place, and invitations need to be extended for more of that. And if you've got resources that are present, you've got to share them. You've got to invest in that creative act of placemaking. Because I've found that if you live in the existence to broader national ideas, you sort of miss the point. A more radical way to say it is theatre that is not related to place inevitably becomes related to class. And that is like...
Say that again. Say that again for those in the back.
Theatre that is not connected to place is connected to class. Who has the money to participate? Who has the money to influence the decision making? So we do a thing where obviously we're an equity theatre, and obviously a lot of the people that we hire on our main stage work have a lot of experience. But we also have opened our doors that any company in Atlanta that wants space to develop new work gets it for free. We've got a playwrights lab, we've got a rehearsal hall, and the doors are open. If a community partner wants to have a meeting, come on in. And I just think that idea of welcome And that idea of prioritizing community and artists, it really affects the work. It really does create this sense of belonging. And that's one of these words that's been fired around on forums, the internet a lot, but it's the experience of it rather than the description of it. So your question about family leads me to say it's not a sacrifice, because this is connected
Value.
deeply to place, which
Yeah.
is like a fundamental value
Yeah.
of leadership and work, because then everybody of the place comes in. And, that shared ownership. There's nothing like a rehearsal room where everybody feels they belong and there's laughter, and you don't have to negotiate that constantly. It's just part of being here.
How old is Theatrical Outfit?
About to turn 50 next year.
That's right. That's what I thought. And was it Tom Keyes the entire time?
So Tom ran it for 25 years.
Okay.
So long enough to be considered a
Right.
founder.
That's what I was thinking to say.
But it was founded in the like late 70s by this group of artists graduating from Georgia State University. And they didn't intend it to be a company that lasted till
50
they were
years,
young,
yeah.
they were hungry.
Yeah.
And they had this idea that all of the brilliant experimental work that was happening in New York could happen in Atlanta, because there was affordable. People here deserved that kind of art, and they did a lot of super weird early Sam Shepard stuff. They brought Mabu Mines down to do
Okay.
residencies. Like
Wow.
it was sort of wild.
Yeah.
The creative ambition of it. And then there was two artistic directors during the 80s that started exploring things more from an ensemble perspective. They took a deep focus on Atlanta artists, and there was a mixture of classics and world premieres and new ideas that I think has characterized the theatre for the first 50-year history. And then for a brief detour, they did original music theatre and musicals, like a famous Hamlet, the musical. And there was a musical version of Beowulf. I'm still friends with that artistic director. And he talked about how the entire musical took place on top of these long wooden tables, and the audience would bang on them with tankards.
Cool.
There's just like that mixture of locality and creativity has been part of our story. And now I'm turning 50. It's like now you're in late middle age. Who are we? What does it mean?
Yeah.
It's really an honor to be stewarding the theatre through such an important birthday. And yeah, I replaced Tom Key, who is one of the most beloved artistic directors I've ever seen, and I'm having breakfast with him on Thursday.
Well, that's lovely. Okay, so then this does help answer my next question, because that sense of while it is 50 years old and he wasn't the founding artistic director, there is that sense that it was his theater. Did you feel second artistic director like syndrome, where it's like the second artistic director after the founder always fails because it's a rejection against, or and then the third artistic director? It's the conversation I just had with Adriana, where she came in after the founding artistic director, and half the people loved her because there was change, and half the people hated her because there was change. And then you get burnt out because you can't please anybody. Obviously, you're there and you're having lunch with him, so there's a different feeling, maybe.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to be here. Because before this, I was the associate artistic director of Studio Theatre in Washington, D.C., which is an amazing theatre. And it's a good bit bigger than this one. I think it's maybe 4 or 5 times the budget. And of course, if you're an associate artistic director of a large theatre, the search firms call you up and they're like, oh, what about this theatre and what about that? Do you want to submit? Do you want to be considered? And there was something, these ideas about place and about deeper meaning were alive in my imagination at that time, about like why, what does it mean to make theatre, not just to do a play. And I think that the experience of ego of those things, which is something I was growing out of, and this theatre that I hadn't heard of was looking for an artistic director. And I was like, not sure about that. And then I read through their values, the mission was and is to produce world-class theatre that starts conversations that matter. And I was like, well, that kind of sums it up.
Yeah.
And then, my wife's a filmmaker, and she was premiering a feature film at the Atlanta Film Festival. So I was like, well, we'll go down, take a look, so we brought our daughter down, and we're in Atlanta at the Plaza Cinema. And I was standing there, holding my daughter, and this guy walks up to me and says, hi, I'm Tom Key. I understand you're interested in being the next artistic director of Theatrical Outfit. Tell me why," which took me by surprise. But not just the directness of it, but the openness of it. And it turns out, of course, my wife had seen him in the lobby. He knew somebody, had come to the movie, and was like, "Hello." And she said, "Oh, I recognize you. You're Tom Key. My husband's out the back. He's the one holding the baby. You should go chat to him."
It was a setup.
But that, I think, sums it up. Welcome, directness, human beings, not the kind of, what's that great quote from Zelda Fish-Handler? Leadership is being at the center of a circle, not at the top of a tower. When you experience that, you're like, yes, this is a basis from which we can create a truly meaningful and potent theater, potent experience. Rather than, I think top-down approach is something that I understand and is common in our industry. That's not what I was after. And then, of course, I applied and did all the interviews and things that you do, and then they offered me the job, and I was a little bit like, shit. I don't know anything about Atlanta. So the first year, of course, I officially started on July 1st, 2020, and on July 2nd, I cancelled the beautiful first season that I'd curated and planned to be the perfect season to replace a beloved artistic director. And instead, we were right in deep with looking after artists and trying to create meaningful work online and answering all of those questions. And now I think that having done it, you actually get a lot of grace as a new artistic director to try new things. People understand it. And of course, there's going to be attrition. People will see the end of one tenure as a chance to move on and do something else. But it also opens the door for new people coming in. And I think what it primarily comes down to is money. Because the relationship with donors and funders, certainly like as we emerged from COVID, was much more of a factor in our continued existence than whether or not people liked the plays or enjoyed the programming. And I think that when somebody who's been in a position for a significant amount of time walks out the door, so does all the relationships that they've had with core funders. So do all the relationships they've had with people who run foundations. So have all the relationships they have with current and former board members. And those relationships are not just formalities. They're an invitation to help create something, to shape the cultural future of a city, of a place. And I think I understood that. So when I came in, I was like, hello, welcome. And the board of directors that we have currently, none of them were part of the theater. Like I think board members have a 3-year tenure. They can renew that and then they can move on. But now it's entirely new. There's a lot of people that supported the theatre for decades that are still around, believing in what I'm doing. And there's new people who've come in. And the idea, I think the fact that we have a clear set of values with which we act and create, and what we say is so aligned with what we do, that just creates confidence in me as a leader, beyond whether or not people like the work or my articulations for the work. But as the leader of a cultural institution, as part of a city that has a role to play in providing jobs, insurance, and healthcare for artists, and learning opportunities for young people who want to kind of advance in their careers, and stable jobs for staff who invest their time and talent and make the theatre better. So I think it's a complex network that I think always has to be renewed creatively. But the inspiration I get for programming comes as much from the city as it does from my own tastes. I think the curating role is something that I appreciate more deeply, and curation alongside vision. That's what I think. That's where I think the best work comes from.
Can you help me and therefore our audience understand Atlanta better? I mean, I'm from Atlanta. I grew up there, and my entire theatrical awakening was in Atlanta. It was I went to performing arts high school, and our teacher was a freelance actor, but also a director as well. And I would be going to 7 Stages or Horizon all the time, seeing these crazy Dutch companies that Seven Stages was bringing over, seeing these remarkably crazy is just the best way to describe it, but it totally informed my personality. And then at the same time, you might not know this guy's name. We had somebody named Bob Barr, who was like Speaker of the House, who found out that Theater in the Square in Marietta was going to be doing Angels in America, and therefore all funding for the arts needed to be taken away from those kind of things. So like there's a religious context, but there's also a metropolitan context, but there's also deep historical context, but there's also the African American context. And I left the country before even any of the film stuff came to town. Any of the Netflix, Marvel Studios, AMC of Georgia came into being. And in a way, I feel like some of that is now, some of the movie stuff is moving on. Can you talk about like what you're finding when you move there, again, kind of sight unseen, and being there inside of it, in the middle of it, what the Atlanta cultural context is, what the Atlanta theatrical context is, what it means to live in this city that is a very creative city, but also a little disjointed in places.
Well, the first thing is everything I thought I knew about Atlanta was wrong. Everything I tried to learn before I got there was wrong. All the ideas I formed during my first months here were wrong. And I think that is the point, that Atlanta is an evolving city and is constantly in conversation with a complex history and like an unknown future. And I think that the thing that defines the culture here, and one of the reasons it's a great place to make theatre, is that there are so many different constituencies, all of whom have their own needs, their own sense of community, that. And I think that, as the cradle of the civil rights movement, there's just a depth and richness to Black culture here. You also have, it's a very religious city, so lots of churches, and then also it's full of entrepreneurs. So there's new companies popping up all the time, new record labels, fashion labels. And I think the thing that defines Atlanta is that just collision of cultures and ideas. And I also think that as an increasingly liberal city in the heart of a not liberal state,
Yeah.
there's all of these tensions that are alive in it. And I think maybe, upon reflection, growing up in Northern Ireland helped me to live with contradictions and live with tensions. But I actually think that's the thing that makes the city great, is that there are all of these different experiences all living together. And by and large, every space I come into is warm and welcoming and rich in humanity. And that's just wonderful. If you show an interest in people in their community, they show an interest in you. And that's what I've experienced time and time and time again. So I would say, to try and completely describe Atlanta, you can describe it one piece at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one event. The Olympics is still every year. The World Cup's about to be here. And the joke here is Atlanta influences everything, because they're just the proximity to political ideas and cultural ideas. I just think is really exciting. And I think that when I reflect on the years I've spent here so far, it's a really wonderful place to be. Like, it's a really wonderful place to be. The grace and humanity I've experienced, the sense of investment in change from our board members and community volunteers and people who want to make it better. It's everywhere you go. And there's a real range of cultural offerings in this city, great museums, great theaters. If you want to eat, there's a place to come. Like the restaurant scene here is incredible, like creative chefs and also immigrants from all over the world opening restaurants. Musically, it's incredible. So I'm a fan, obviously. But I think pretty much any grand statement I could make about the truth of Atlanta identity would be wrong.
I think the closest that I've come to understanding Atlanta, again, being away, like you're right. Like I left it like 28 years ago, almost 30 years ago, to go away for school and then just kind of never coming back, but then leaving the country in the last 16 years. That you're absolutely right. Like it is constantly evolving. But the best kind of understanding I've had is I love going to restaurants and understanding a city through its food scene as well. And the Atlanta food scene was described to me as chaos menu. That thing that like where cultures are, it's not fusion, but like, a Mexican chef is going to be making Filipino German food with influences of Asia, and it's like that's the the chaos of that, but it works, and that's the best. That's been the best description of that.
My favorite restaurant at the minute, this place called Talat Market.
Yeah.
That is, it's like a chef is marrying Thai cuisine with Southern cuisine. So it's like okra curries, and it's incredible. Chaos menu, and you're invited to an experience, and the chef will come out and talk to you. Like, it's just that sense of connected culture and real human beings. I mean, definitely the big thing that we can say for sure about Atlanta is there's a lot of misunderstandings about what the South is and how the South exists culturally in this country. And until you come somewhere like Atlanta and you just see people living with all of those contradictions quite happily.
Yeah.
It's not just full of one political ideology and everybody, waving the same flag. It's really complicated.
Yeah.
And that complexity is very rich because there's plenty of parts of the country that are very homogenous. So that's just something that I really enjoy. And I really enjoyed having my stereotypes and preconceptions about what the South was just completely overturned.
Yeah, a really progressive city in a really conservative state, but a very particular kind of conservatism.
Yeah.
That is not like the leading ideology that we're experiencing right now, a business friendly conservatism that's like old school conservatism. Okay. Yeah. It is a complex.
There's a lot of supporters of that. The current, the more, the less kind of stolid and boring conservative.
That they exist. That's true.
But the full range, but in the cities, but even still, there are just examples of kindness everywhere, and I think that that's something that a theater can offer. Because I know that there's a lot of people really focused on art and resistance, but kindness is resistance. I mean, that's one of the
true.
It's one of the lessons of the civil rights movement,
right? Yeah,
it's like violence doesn't heal anything.
Yeah,
love can, and I think that's not to say let's have a political ideology that's open to everybody, but it is to say that if you make kindness one of your core operational values, that literally that's what you're trying to achieve. That's how you're trying to support artists. People will tell you the most extraordinary things about their lives, about their political ideologies, about things that they disagree with, like the complexity of human beings beyond internet statements is something that can kind of live richly. And like the number of actors who have met their parents in the lobby, and they come up to you like, oh, look, this is my mom and dad. And that just delights me too. Because it's the opposite of some of the more formal theater experiences I have, or formal theater relationships I have. I actually just directed a show off Broadway at the Irish Rep, and that was exactly that, just that sense of kindness and welcome as a core institutional value. It was just delightful to work in, but also, and more importantly, that comfort and trust allows for extraordinary vulnerability. And I think when people are trying to make art with extraordinary vulnerability and great ambition, there's like this hypercharge that happens. And I think that's what, I suppose what I'm describing is a theater for a community rather than community theater, because world class is part of our mission and excellence is at the core of that. But I think the unhealthy idea of excellence is that it needed to be beaten into you. If there was no suffering, there was no excellence. If there was no striving, there was no excellence. Whereas if the excellence is coming from an emerging self, an emerging being shaped through craft, you create a very different sense of ownership of the art from the artist. You create a very, very, very different sense of collaboration in the room. And this is the practice of certainly when I'm directing, talk a lot less, make less statements, let art emerge from people's personal experiences and meet in the middle, because you don't need to agree to make art. And in fact, I think this pursuit of agreement sanitizes everything, silences people, and just letting people be themselves in a kind of radical way, and just finding out all the frictions that exists in and not being afraid of them, and then not over describing things so it kills inspiration. That I mean, we've had an extraordinary artistic run the last few years. I mean, in the local theatre awards last year, we won both best production of a musical and best production of a play.
Damn.
And it's
congratulations.
But I'm not saying that to be like, oh,
no, but
aren't we great? It's an example of what happens when you make kindness and integrity your core values, and you invite artists to bring it all, put it all on the table, and that they own it. It's theirs. It's like it makes great stuff because they're not trapped, not stifled by somebody else's vision, or like, to be frank, somebody else's cruelty. And that cruelty, I think, unfortunately, defines a lot of people's experience of theatre.
What do you think actors would say? I mean, beyond kindness, which I think would be a first, last, and always thing of difference. But what do you think? What do you think actors would say is distinctive about being in a room with you? Like, can you speak on maybe expand on the kindness of what it means to ask for time, being a leader in a space that is constantly having to tell some people no.
Yep.
But leading with kindness, but also distinctively you as a director in that space, as you said, talk less, listen more. Those are two really great things. How else would actors describe you?
So kindness is not necessarily like a soft thing.
Yeah.
I kind of get emotional talking about it because it's such a core value, because it connects to dignity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it is perfectly acceptable to say no to somebody if it is not the right choice, but to do it in a way that protects their dignity, because people are reasonable whenever you speak to them as full human beings. And if what you're doing in your role as leader or your role as authority figure is saying, no, my idea first, or no, we're not going to do this. No one likes that. No one likes that. But if you're like, look, completely see where you're coming from, completely understand what you're doing and why this is your perspective. This is my perspective. My responsibility is to honor these core values, make these choices. These are the goals, not in alignment with the goals. We're not going to be able to do that. But you could do it. If you want space to do it, we'll give you space. If you want to form a company and get at it, go for it. And I just think that idea of protecting dignity and really being present to the individual. I learned all this. The first time I started to reflect on this was there was one of the first times I got to work with a trans artist on a production in DC at Studio Theatre, Lady Dane Adidi, who's just an incredible artist. And we went for coffee and we didn't talk about identity. Lady Dane wanted to ask me about my family, about my grandparents. We talked about family. And I think you learn a lot more about who someone is when you talk about family than you do when you talk about political beliefs or those things. And that when you lead with that, and when people know that they are welcome in that way in your room, there is much less tension. I am a very demanding director. I expect like a lot of rigor. I expect people to come into the room prepared. I expect them to really bring it. I will push people into like very uncomfortable places emotionally. I will whatever anyone is bringing into the room. I see my job is to raise the bar of that. But when your starting point is, I see you as a full human being, then people trust more. They want to achieve that. It's less I'm being forced to and more I'm being invited to. And I think that I hope, I mean, this is definitely my perspective of how I am perceived, which is always a dubious thing to represent. But what I intend to create is that idea of like a radical presence and an invitation to make your best. And I really try and avoid over analyzing, over describing, and just being awake to instinct and offering the quick thing and try this and go here and try something else, so it is what I call an emergent process. And that's been really effective in my work in the last 10 years. Like really, really, really effective in creating great art that people really love, particularly people in them, because they feel that they own them. I don't think that even though I put kindness first, that people would be like, "Oh, he's so warm and fuzzy." I think they think of a good sense of humor, and I bring a culture of respect. But kindness gives you the permission to demand integrity. And if you're not manifesting integrity yourself, then forget about it. The second you introduce someone without integrity into a space based on integrity, it's clear as day, and also
Yeah.
everything starts to go wrong
Yeah.
because that's. But I think that's the perils of the trade, the kindness trade.
Do you find so you are still freelancing? How often do you get to allow yourself to able to do that in a year?
Tends not to be more than once. Some years not at all. In the last year, though, I've got to do a little bit more of it. So I directed this play off Broadway, as I said, and that was just a wonderful experience. And then a production I directed last year of the Lehman Trilogy. Was invited to go to the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. There's a great new artistic director over there who probably would have some of these same values that I'm describing, who wanted to break the cycle of just bringing all the artists in from New York and to build more regional relationships. We came to see Lehman Trilogy and it was just like, wow, this really is very potent, because we made that with a Jewish organization here and a lot of Jewish artists. We told the whole story, like incorporating ideas of Jewish ritual. So instead of the big, bells and whistles of 17 projectors that they had on Broadway, it was something much deeper and simpler, more theatrical. So he said, please bring this to the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. And I'm like, great. So I was in New York for part of August, all of September, and part of October, half of October. Then I came back here and directed a radical new production, A Glass Menagerie. And then I went to Alabama and had to stop off in New York on the way to direct the remount of the play at Irish Rep. So that put a real strain on family. And that's something, when you're getting remounts and shows coming back and stuff like that, you can't plan for that.
No, yeah.
You got to just sort of do your best. But what I have found is that, particularly in larger institutions, when you walk in with these values of, I expect extraordinary work from every single person involved in this production, and also, I'm really interested in who you are as a human being. Like, people get really moved by that, particularly like staff members or folks in the production department. And, I like when you see people as full human beings, they invest in the work in a different way, whether they're building something, painting something, like adjusting the electronics or programming something, or it's the staff member popping in for a watch, And I find that has been a great lesson to me in some of the hierarchical problems that our culture is currently trying to solve, have become ingrained into the structures of how work has been made, who's been invited to make it, and how that persists, particularly in large organizations where I think it is much more difficult to change culture.
You've answered so many of my questions. This is fantastic. No, it's lovely, because I was going to say, like, obviously, without naming names, you've worked at places where those are not values that exist possibly in those places. That perfectionism, excellence, going on, and then bringing that into that space and finding maybe my values are counter to what this place is. Maybe I don't want to be here again, or maybe I am introducing, or I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to live what I'm going to do. And maybe all I do is nudge the needle a little bit.
Yeah, I'll say, I think it's more nuanced than that, because I think in every space I've worked, people's intentions,
Yeah.
they're very clear. Like I've not. I mean, there's a few places you've worked where it's led by like a toxic figure, and You see that everywhere. And, particularly cultures where people lose their temper or yell, which is something that never happens.
Yeah.
A theatrical outfit.
Yeah.
From anybody.
Yeah.
And it's not even that we police it. It just tends not to happen, because I think our cultural values are so clear. But in nearly every place I've worked in the last few years, there is the intention to create meaningful art, good culture. It's just whenever things are existing at that scale, it's very easy for people to get lost in their own part of it. To take a second to learn someone's name.
Yeah.
It's just something, because I'm not actually talking about me doing anything radical. I'm not leading meetings and everyone's hugging each other. It's all really simple stuff like, hi, what's your name? Thank you very much. Or we're actually going to need to change this. This is the artistic vision we're trying to achieve. Thank you so much for your work on this. We need to do something else. Can you help me with that? It's just a very different approach. There have been a couple of moments where my values have been tested recently, where people are like, this must change and I'm manifesting authority and I expect you to manifest authority too. And I mean, I just say, no. If you want me to solve the problem, I'll solve the problem, but I will not be losing my temper or forcing anybody, because that will not solve the problem. And if you suck the joy out of the work for that person, you will not get good work. But I see good intention everywhere. And I will also say that if a kind word can change the cultural perception in those rooms, then it was already there.
Yeah.
Those people are there. It's not like a golden person walks in and transforms everything around them and then leaves with a kind of crown of ivy on their head. Those people are there. They've been working there for years. They've got complicated relationships with one another that are often full of kindness. It's all about just... And as I'm describing this, I realize what I am describing the opposition to is the idea of director as like royal person, as final arbiter of everything, as most important vision, as the driving force, the charge behind everything, who somehow then has a right to yell or to force or to be brutal and to be cruel. And as a producer, I've seen, not so much at Theatrical Outfit, but in other theatres and contexts I've produced, I've seen this behavior. And I just don't respect it. Like, even if the art that comes out of it is good, who's it for? Then it just feels like the product is being delivered with this stereotype, And I actually had a lighting designer I worked with recently just say, thank you for not getting angry with me. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, it is so uncommon for someone not to be angry that they're thanking me for a basic expectation that you would have going to work.
Yeah.
So actually, I think that's the important thing, is that it's not radical. It's not that these organizations are broken and need fixing. It's just that you need to remember to check in. And if you don't know the name of the people working on your show, then you really need to look in the mirror and say, was I brought up to do this? What would my grandmother think of me? Yeah. And anyway, but I don't think those values are in opposition to making extraordinary, rigorous, transformational work. I think that is just a different basis for understanding it from the bottom up or the inside out, rather than from the top down.
What do you think it... It'll get real personal here for a second. Where do you think that disconnect or that comes from? Because as you're saying, like, I don't think these people were raised this way. I don't think whoever that director was, maybe they were, but I know so many directors that yell in the room, and I know so many like designers or even actors that are like puppies in the corner who've been hit too many times. I know this. I see it very well. I'm teaching and trying to train that out of, don't do that. That's not helpful in the process long term. Do you think it is the pressure the money, the zero-sum gameness of regional theater where we're all vying for little scraps of time and money and attention? Or is it just the coarsening of the dialogue in the country as it is now? Like, where does that come from, and how do we, beyond modeling it, how do we start to correct and show a different side? I say this, I said because personally, like, I was thrown into a show more than halfway through the process. So all of the world building is done, all of the exploration is done. All I get to do is come in and stage inside of a system that I can have virtually zero control over. And I found myself instantly confronting my values, which as you're describing, your values are very, very similar the same way of, if people aren't having a good time in the room, it doesn't matter how good the show is. If they don't leave there wanting to come back the next day, then I've failed as a director anyway. But I'm being confronted with, because of the pressure, because of the time, because of the lack of money, instantly I became tunnel visioned and maybe was a little coarser than I ever would have wanted to be. Is it just that, or is it something else?
Well, so a couple of things. First of all, if a director that was working in my theater was describing this problem or describing this situation, what you're really describing is a culture in the room that's misaligned. You know, everybody is doing their own thing, and it requires force to gather that energy together and focus it. And that force is something that, you know, in the land of chaos, or the land of, you know, that you want to get it done. You want people to think well of you. You're hired to do a job. But it is, while that is understandable on an instinctive level, it's not the most effective use of time and energy. If you solve the problem first of get everybody together, name the goals and values, forge the path forward, sort out whatever shit there is, who's got bad feelings, get it out of the way. You might even have to do a thing where that is terrifying, which is you're not going to be able to be part of this moving forward person. You don't have the right values. We are going to recalibrate this thing so that we can all move forward together. But that is not how people are trained. Like, that skill set is something that either you have it as a human being already, you've learned it from a teacher. You've seen someone do this and you know it's a path. So I was an associate director of a company in Ireland called Rough Magic for 8 years. It's where I did my apprenticeship. I directed for them professionally. And that theatre emerged out of ensemble. And a lot of the same artists who founded it over 20, 30 years are still with the company, either in the audience or on the stage. You know, there's like this deep sense of connection. And the core values of that were like 80s leftist values of joint decision making and collective action, you know. But the artistic director, who's a wonderful woman from Belfast called Lynn Parker, turned around to me one day and said, rule number 1, don't be a dick. So then, you know, and I remember I was assisting on a show soon after that, that shall remain nameless, and I had a live bird in it. And I remember there was 2 people on the crew who were very concerned about the bird because there was gunshots and things in the show. And they were very concerned about the bird. And they were really concerned about the bird, and they kept getting increasingly concerned about the bird. And you know, the director who I was assisting got really frustrated with this and said, if you don't shut up about that fucking bird, I'm going to bite its head off and make you fucking eat it.
Jeez.
Like, talk about, you know, cruelty.
Yeah.
And the reason they were getting worked up is that no one had said, oh, tell us about the bird. Great. What are your concerns? And let's address those concerns. No one had asked or listened. So these people have been fighting for their values, and they were told, shut up, or I'm going to harm you. Now, the leadership of the theatre didn't do anything. Everybody was like, oh, we got to keep it. We got to soothe the angry man. Oh, we got to step in here. And I think that because our culture, because I don't think this is new, I don't think our culture is coarsening. In fact, I think the opposite is occurring. And I think we are building on generations of cruelty, and cruelty that masquerades as excellence. cruelty that masquerades as intelligence or intellectual sophistication. Like this is how many of the artists in our field have been formed. They yell because they've been yelled at. They yell because the models are they yell because the is drummed into everybody is you must get the show done. Your vision must be immaculate and it must happen now. And everybody must adore you and everybody must worship and you need to get your name out there in the New York Times. If you don't do this, you're failing or you're like some kind of crystal wearing hippie. But I mean, but the truth is, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work because even if the product is excellent, no one believes in it. And then it becomes a product that is sold. Or the worst people on my list are hypocrites who say one thing and do another, who preach community but practice cruelty, who preach integrity but behind the scenes will worm out of commitments and not own things and not clean them up because that creates a different sort of culture. That creates a culture of subterfuge and manipulation and lying, which in some ways is sort of more difficult to deal with because everybody knows a bully. You see them, but you don't know like a Judas until you receive the knife in the back.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, and that's just that level of manipulation is something that everybody who works in the theater is also familiar with. But these, I would say, used to be the dominant cultures. But I've worked with, in all the theaters I have worked at in the last 5 years, kindness is more the norm that is being sought and pursued. Now, can you make it stick? How do you deal with things that interrupt that? How do you deal with negative directors who like to yell? There's a lot of different pressures in multiple directions to recalibrate that. So I think that the thing is changing. But I talk about integrity to every single apprentice that comes into Theatrical Outfit. And I also did with the folks who worked with me at Studio Theatre, though I think a lot of the ideas that I practice on a daily basis were less formed then. I think I was still a little bit like, must succeed, must be the best, must. And, the irony is that since I started practicing kindness and teaching it, or practicing integrity and teaching it, because I think integrity is the better word, my work has just gotten so much better, like exponentially, because you work without fear. You work without fear of attack. You work without fear. You work without fear. So yeah, the vast majority of people who yell is because they were yelled at. The way we change it is by interrupting that. If we see somebody yelling at somebody, particularly somebody with less power and authority, we call it out immediately. We stop it. We don't let that become the dominant culture. And if we fail to do that, we've got to take responsibility for that as leaders, so people know that that was a failure, not just the order of being. So glad that you're teaching this to your students, but the culture needs to change. It needs to change if theater is going to remain relevant. Because if it doesn't, how many people no longer make theater or practice it because they were bullied?
Yeah.
Because the joy was taken from them.
Yeah. What are you still hungry for?
Right now, the stuff that kind of is really exciting me artistically is very much on the artistic director side of things. I'll be delighted and always will be delighted to kind of do freelance work and work with new artists and new things. But we've got this new work program called Made in Atlanta that I founded, the first year it came in. And I decided that it was going to be like commissions for main stage production rather than new work program that explores curiosity. It was very much about getting things produced and breaking the cycle of reading, promise production, funding falls through, sorry, maybe next year. And instead be like, we're going to do this. And the first thing I did in I think it was like my second month after I was hired, I worked for 9 months before I took over as artistic director just to plan the season and learn the ropes to have a better chance of replacing a founder, was I commissioned a hip hop musical about Congressman John Lewis.
Mm.
And it's called Young John Lewis. There's an idea that just sort of bam. I was like, what if I was to make it, what's Atlanta? And he was the congressman for Atlanta for 17 years. His office is across the street from the theater. Saw him making a speech, I think sometime around when I got hired.
Hero.
And I was like, hero. And
Yeah.
the reason he's a hero is he's the conscience of Congress. And I remember that the Black Lives Matter movement was really starting to heat up, and we'd just been through the Me Too movement. And this idea of conscience was something that was very much on my mind. And I was like, how did he become like a man of conscience, a politician of conscience? Was he always like that, or did it emerge? And then, I did a bit of research, and I learned that when he was age 18, he was like trying to desegregate lunch counters in Nashville. And when he was 28, Dr. King was assassinated, and he, in some ways, picked up the mantle of nonviolent political direct action that he lived for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
When he was 28.
Yeah.
You're just like, what? So I just thought, like, what if we made a hip hop musical based on those years so that other young people could see themselves taking that same journey? So we commissioned it. We developed it over 5 years. We premiered it on Wednesday. A concert version with much of the original cast is happening at Cobb Energy Centre for 2,000 high school students.
Awesome.
We're going to get another 1,000 people in the next 2 days as part of a community audience, these community performances. And that feels like something where art and activism meets, where like excellence and conscience can create real change in our community. And, artists are singing their heart out. It is the highest standard of artistic excellence, but the clarity of what it is meant to achieve is just extraordinary. Also, it made in Atlanta, there's 2 other productions that we premiered. One was a Candace Jones Flex that's performed at Lincoln Center and theaters all across the country. And in the program, it always says premiered in Atlanta, Georgia. And I love that. I think 2 productions on main stages in Washington, D.C. in this calendar year originated a Theatrical Outfit in our Made in Atlanta program. And I just think that the stuff that I'm hungry for is more and better work coming out of Atlanta and how we can support that. And I think we're just about to announce our next commission. I think it does all of those things.
Well,
and I'm very excited for the next 3 years to kind of cook that up. And I think we might have a little bit of national collaboration on that. So that idea of Atlanta influences everything put into practice.
Put into practice.
Like,
nice.
Again, trusting artists, listening to ideas, curating it carefully, launching it. I just think that's massive. That's massive. So yeah, excellence on our main stage for people that come to see our work. Hopefully continuing to set standards of excellence in Atlanta and pursuing to do that. And then radical creativity in our Made in Atlanta New Work program. And then a real radical welcome in the way that we support young companies and other artists in the city. Like,
that's cool.
I'm like, I'm hungry for that. I want to collide those 3 things and see what like an ensemble of amazing artists can make and what young hungry people can. That's what that gets me fired up. And I've basically described our next 5-year strategic plan to you.
And that's phenomenal to hear. I mean, like, when you started out saying that you have space available for anybody who wants it, that's already a radical thing, because that is such a barrier to so many young theater makers as it is. To then go, but we're also really committed to Made in Atlanta, which means like it's that thing of like the regional Tony is great, but like it doesn't matter if it's a regional Tony if you don't represent the place that is there. As you're saying, like it's so clear about the place and class and everything. It's just gorgeous thoughts. It's so clear what it is that you're trying to do, or what you are doing, and what you're going to continue to do.
Well, again, Brian Kulik. It's not the description of it; it's the execution of it with rigor and precision. That's articulation is the key. Intention is the key. And living your values are the key. And not being afraid to disagree with people. And if a disagreement emerges, you resolve it. That doesn't end a relationship or spur a drama. It's just what human beings do. We all have families. We
Yeah.
all have relationships.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
know the drill. You just gotta practice it. Also, the regional Tony. That's a funny one because everyone, like, I would love to win a regional Tony, but what would that mean to the people sitting in the seats? We did a co-production of Raisin in the Sun last year with a commercial theater company that's focused on like African American stories and Black artists, and the artistic director of that, Rob Connor, just a wonderful human being, quite bombastic and opinionated. And he was like, I make theater that I want my mom and my sisters to enjoy. And if it's not going to do that, I'm not gonna do it. And I was just like, well, yeah, let's just do that. Let's do a Raisin in the Sun, not for core white audience of subscribers, but to have this radical welcome. And he was like, most people think doing plays for a Black audience is for poor people. I'm telling you, that's bullshit. That if you're asking a Black guy to spend money taking his girlfriend out, he wants a step and repeat. He wants valet parking. He wants good drinks. He wants a nice, clean, fancy space. He wants good seats with a good view. It's like if you don't understand that, you don't understand Atlanta. But also, you're really not understanding like the diversity of the cultural spectrum that exists in America. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. You're like, yep. Great. So we got our step and repeat. We got some nice lights on it. And we weren't able to arrange the valet parking, but we definitely made sure that it was like a super welcome and high end experience. And the social media engagement was through the roof. Selfies in front of the step and repeat, people just, and then our regular audience just really enjoying like a sense of a cultural evolution. I don't know. It's like, again, the experience of another description of it. And you got to listen. You got to take your notes and then put your resources into those things.
I'm cognizant of your time, but I would be amiss if I didn't ask, because you have kind of mentioned, who are artists that you wish, who are directors that you wish there was more attention being paid to? Not that they're better or anything else like that, but like people that you're seeing the work that you're like, I want people to look out for them or go see the thing if you see their name, or they really need to be elevated.
So the current artistic director of the Alliance Theatre is an artist called Tinashe Kajeze Bolden, and everything I've seen Tinashe do has just been electric. And Tinashe really embodies kind of what's the culture conversations that are going on in Atlanta. And I know that she just worked at the Geffen and she's kind of like started to work around the place, and she's also directed some lovely musicals for the Alliance. And I think that she is an artist whose work needs to be seen on a much, 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 much broader scale.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see Tinashe working on Broadway and other regional houses and bringing Atlanta artists with her. But yeah, she's somebody who like I could really, really, really get behind. And then there's some really great artists working in DC who like I crossed over with. The guy who wrote Young John Lewis is a great director called Salmayeni 24, who embodies uh, like a sense of activism. Like he used to be the dude with dreads who, played the djembe and would do performance poetry, and now he's a playwright and just become a really brilliant director. And I think that the richness of his experience, creates really, really, really fantastic work. And then there's two other artists I want to mention. One is the new artistic director of Theatre Alliance in Shannara Gabrielle, who is revolutionizing that company and its relationship with community. And I think really like blowing open the doors there. And then the artistic director of an Irish theatre company called Solace Nua in Washington, D.C., a guy called Rex Darty, who just has boundless energy and an extraordinary vision. And for a tiny company in Washington, D.C., to be having the level of impact they're having nationally and internationally, including a co-production with the Abbey, this tiny scrappy theater company. You know, I just think that there's a lot of those artists I'm talking. I keep track of them, not just for what they're making, but for the road that they're carving forward as artists and leaders.
Fantastic. And those will be my invitations to the podcast so that I can delve into that and help what little I can to elevate that. Matt, thank you for this conversation. I enjoy speaking with directors about process. I enjoy speaking to directors about the shows, but to speak to a director about their values is really why I started Board of Directors, why I do a monthly international meetup with all the directors from around the world. And sometimes it is about, how do you talk to an actor about that? But really it is about this value conversation. We don't get to see each other's work. We don't get to experience the low lows. We get to experience the successes maybe. So to be open about that and talk about that is such a welcome gift for why the podcast exists and why the Board of Directors was set up. So thank you for today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure.
If this episode gave you any insight, inspiration, or even just made you smile, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts for more conversations like this. And if you're looking for guidance with a creative challenge or want to advance a dream of your own, we'd love to help. Visit boardofdirectors.world. The Board of Directors is a global constellation of theater directors dedicated to building community, sharing knowledge, and transforming the role of the director in the 21st century. We convene and curate a fellowship that fosters mentorship, artistic inquiry, and collective care, transcending borders and institutions and traditions. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.